Mother's Day is probably by far the worst of and most misunderstood of all the holidays, humanly speaking, of the year. I'm not talking specifically like Christmas and Easter. Those are out the window. I'm talking about like where we celebrate like people, regular people besides Jesus. Because Mother's Day, like we take one day out of the year to try to make our mothers feel special, but guys, we always do a horrible job at it. And mom is like one day out of the year, I'm supposed to have the day off and not do anything at all. Like the expectation is pretty high for Mother's Day. And on the one day of the year, we tend to really just jack it up. It's like this morning, guess who got our kids dressed? My wife. I gave her some flowers this morning, or the kids gave her some flowers this morning, and the projects that they made for her at school. But is that payment enough for like all the time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears that she's put into like her children? And Chris is over there like, no, it ain't. I'm telling you, of all of the holidays, like Father's Day, sure, whatever, that's probably a accurate, thank you for the fathers, because we tend to not do it nearly as much because mothers are just awesome. And God created you that way. If I had to raise my kids, I've told you before, like if something ever happens to my wife, on Sunday number 1, my daughter's head is going to be shaved. I can't handle that. I don't have the patience for that. But my wife, she does. Men and women are created fundamentally different. Like, I'm okay with taking care of the kids. I can handle them for a day. But there's just something about mom. Like, she just has this innate, God-given ability to just love and to serve and be compassionate. I'm compassionate for like maybe 2 or 3 minutes. And then my compassion's out the window. It's like when you get hurt and dad scoops you up and shakes you around a little bit. You're all right. Just rub some dirt on it. You'll be fine. Mom's like, I'm just gonna hold you until you stop crying because I love you and it's gonna be okay. Don't worry about it. You're gonna live. And I'll take care of you, and we'll go get a Band-Aid. And I'm like, you don't need a Band-Aid for that. There's nothing there. Why would you put a Band-Aid on it? But mom doesn't even think twice about it. Like, we'll just put a Band-Aid on it. It's going to be okay. Men and women on a fundamental level think differently. I remember growing up, I was probably like 14, 15, and I wanted a four-wheeler, like in the worst way. And so my dad, he's like, well, sure, you save up your money and you can buy one. And so I saved up some money and talked my uncle into loaning me the rest, and I bought one. And so then all my friends, they're all like, well, now we have to get four-wheelers because Justin has a four-wheeler. And I had this one friend, my best friend, his name's Brandon, and he's an only child, right? And some of you know what that means, right? Moms are mom, but when mom's the mom of an only child, it's a completely different ball game. Like you're extremely special. There's no backups. And so he said, Mom, I want a four-wheeler in the worst way. And so they go out and they buy him a four-wheeler for his birthday. And so I was over at his house. He'd had this puppy for maybe like 2 weeks or something. And we're out riding around after school. And his mom wasn't home yet. And so he's like, hey, you want to drive? Yeah, I wasn't planning on telling you this story. I don't know how we got to this, but we're actually going to get to the Bible here in a minute. But he said, you want to drive? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And so I hop up front, and my four-wheeler had four-wheel drive. And so you take off, you're not going to like do a wheelie because it's got four-wheel drive. You got the transfer case out in the front. Well, his four-wheeler did not have four-wheel drive, and he's sitting on the back of it with his hands like this. And so I take off, the front end comes up, and I just did this wheelie down the road for like a solid 20 yards. It was amazing. It was like one of the highlights of my life. And I turn around and there's this cloud of smoke behind me from this gravel road or dust. and Brandon's not on the back of the four-wheeler anymore. And so I look back through the dust and I see him rolling down the road, and I'm like, oh no. And so I turn around and go back. He's like crawling up the road, blood coming down his face. He was still holding on to the back of the four-wheeler, but his head was like bobbing off the ground. That's why I did a wheelie so far, because he was holding the front of the four-wheeler up. And so I get him on the back of the four-wheeler, and he's like, am I going to die? And he's bleeding all over the place. We pull up to his house. His dad walks out. Bobby Weaver looks at me and looks at Brandon. He says, boy, you better go in the house and get yourself cleaned up before your mama gets home. And he leaves. That's Dad. And Mom comes home, and I'm getting questioned. There's a hospital trip. There's stitches. Dad would have left the rocks in his forehead. Moms and dads are fundamentally different. But at the core, we all have the same problem. But we think differently. So we're actually going to take a trip back in time to 1 Samuel this morning in chapter 1, and there's so many passages of Scripture that we could use on Mother's Day. There's so many different godly mothers that are laid out in the Scripture. Mothers who've had failures, mothers who've had successes, mothers who've had successes and failures. I mean, we could talk about Eve, we could talk about Sarah, we could talk about, Ruth, Naomi, you go down the whole list. I mean, there's all of these mothers that we could talk about. We could talk about Rebecca. We could talk about Mary. You can't forget her. There's all these moms we could talk about, but I want to this morning look at Hannah. And how many of you are familiar with the story of Hannah? So this is like my daughter's favorite story, go figure, because it's her name. But we're gonna look at Hannah this morning, and we're going to start in 1 Samuel chapter 1 and verse 2. And this is, I'll start reading it. It says, and he had 2 wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah, or Penina, I'll pronounce this 15 different ways through the course of this morning, so just a heads up, had children, but Hannah had no children. And this man went up out of his city yearly to worship and to sacrifice unto the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. And the 2 sons of Eli, actually we're gonna get to that in just a second. So let's backtrack here. So problem number 1 in verse number 2, he had 2 wives. I can't think of any place in Scripture where a husband who has 2 wives, it works out well for him. Like, there's always a problem when you have 2 wives. I've heard people make the argument before, well, the Bible teaches polygamy. Well, the problem is you're not going to find any place in the Bible where it says having multiple wives is a good thing. And it's a good idea. It ain't there. In fact, if you want to go on a journey, we're not going to go look at it this morning, but you can go there later. 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 12 and verse 2, actually, and Titus chapter 1, verse 6, where it lays out the roles of a shepherd or a leader. Like, one of the number 1 stipulations is the husband of how many wives? 1. It's like, don't drag that craziness into God's house. There is only room in your life for 1 wife. God created 1 man and 1 woman, and they are to become 1 flesh, and 1 makes the perfect number, which is 2. And some of you ladies are like, if I could get rid of my husband, it would be even better. I think you should keep him. We'll work on it. But this is a fundamental problem from the get-go. He has 2 wives, and these 2 wives are not on the same page. They're not even in the same place in life. In fact, there's a really good possibility that the reason that he had the second wife in the first place was because Hannah was not able to give him an heir. The text doesn't specifically say that, but we can look back on other places in the Old Testament where it's very clear that husbands make dumb decisions when they don't have an heir. I mean, look at Abraham and Sarah, right? I mean, think of all the trouble that one caused. When Sarah's like, well, Hagar might be a good idea. Like, well, Hagar was not a good idea. It was a poor idea. And but anyways, so he has two wives. The one was Hannah, and the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. This is an issue. The one has kids, and the other doesn't have kids. In a world and in a culture where everything that you are going to pass on, everything that you have in this life is dependent upon having an heir to give it to. And she could not give him an heir. And so she takes this on herself like it's her fault. Now, was it her fault that she could not have a child? Absolutely not. But she takes this responsibility onto herself. But I pick back up here in verse number 3, and it says, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priest of the Lord, were there. And when the time was that Elikai offered and gave to Peninnah his wife, and to her sons and to her daughter portions, and unto Hannah he gave a worthy portion, for he loved Hannah, but the Lord had shut up her womb. So, okay, the relationship just got that much crazier. So let me back up here. They are most likely going to Shiloh to observe what is called the Feast of Tabernacles. There's three different feasts that the Old Testament lays out that they're supposed to go and to observe in worshiping God. The first is the Feast of Passover. The second is the Feast of Weeks. And the third is the Feast of Tabernacles. But the Feast of Tabernacles was a lot more focused on the eating side of it and the family side of it than the others. So most likely, this is the Feast of Tabernacles. But when they're handing out the portions of this animal that was sacrificed, Hannah gets a double portion or a worthy portion above and beyond what Peninnah gets. So it's like the one wife, she was able to give him children, and she was good for giving him some heirs, and she got a portion of this sacrifice. But when they were divvying it out, Hannah didn't get the same amount of food as Peninnah and her kids did. Instead, Hannah gets twice as much food. Some translations say a double portion, some say a worthy portion. It was a noticeable difference. And then he gives the reason why. He says, Hannah, he loved Hannah. Do you think, yes or no, would that create some problems in your marriage? Absolutely. So the one is sitting here, she's just getting what he's obligated to give her. I am required to feed my kids. I'm required to feed this wife. But this wife, I love her, and I'm going to give her more. That didn't set too well with the other wife. In fact, we find that it caused some huge problems. Verse 6. And as he did so year by year, let's stop there for just a second. This isn't a one-time thing. This is year after year after year. He acknowledges his love toward the one, and the other gets the bare minimum. This was probably carried out throughout each one of the feasts throughout every year, because he was required as an able-bodied man to be at these feasts And we know that Hannah went with him to the feast. So it says in verse 7, as he did year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, so she provoked her, therefore she wept and did not eat. And then said, how do you pronounce that, Norm? Elkanah, yeah, there we go. Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou? So you got Peninnah, who is ridiculing Hannah because Hannah can't have kids. So Peninnah, the one who is not loved as much, she's ridiculing the other wife and saying, you're a horrible person. You can't do what you're supposed to do. You can't have kids. La-di-da-da-da. It's a mess. And Elkanah doesn't make matters any better because he has this fix-it type of mentality. How many of you as husbands have gotten yourself into some big trouble trying to fix things that you probably should not have been trying to fix? We all have. So he tells Hannah, he says, why are you crying? He says, and why eatest thou not? He's like, I've given you more food than I've given my other wife. He's like, I have showered you with these gifts. He's like, why are you crying? Why don't you just eat the food that I gave you? How many of you ladies like that would be adequate? No. I don't. Chris is like, I'd take the food, right? So no, but yeah, that's not enough to fix the problem. And he's like, is the food that I've given you? He's like, is it not enough? Why are you crying? Then he says, why did you not eat? He's like, you didn't eat anything. He's like, I gave you a double portion and you chose to not eat any of it. It's like, I'm trying to fix this. I'm trying to make it better for you. And you're not even taking the help that I'm offering you. If you would just eat this, I think you would feel better. Verse 8, then said Elkanah, her husband, to her, Hannah, why weepest thou, and why eatest thou not? And why is thy heart grieved? Am I not better to thee than 10 sons? Yeah, he just made it that much worse. He's like, I've just showered you with gifts, and you just have thrown them all off to the side. And then he throws the hammer down, and it crushes himself, all right? He's like, am I not better than you having 10 sons? Don't you love me more than you would love even if you had 10 sons? He is digging this hole, and it's turning into a mess. Every relationship has two different types of people in it besides just the difference between men and women. There are people in the relationship who are fixers. I want to fix the problem. And then there are people there's usually a person in the relationship who is broken and therefore needs fixing. But was Elkanah capable of fixing Hannah's problem? No. Did Hannah really have a problem? Yes, she did. Her problem wasn't that she couldn't have kids. Her problem was in her heart. Her problem was no different than any problem that any one of you in here are struggling with. It was an issue that she had in this life, and she was handling it in a way that was not glorifying and honoring to God. She was constantly broken. She wasn't able to just surrender it. Her husband says, why are you grieved? He's like, what do you have to grieve about? I'll give you food. I'm better to you than all the sons in the world. Okay, 10 sons would have been. He's like, why are you grieved? Verse 9. So Hannah rose up after they had eaten in Shiloh, and after they had drunk. And now Eli the priest sat upon the seat by the post of the temple of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul. at the core of who Hannah was, she was bitter on the inside. She was bitter, no doubt, toward God, because God had not given her what she felt like she should have. She was bitter toward her husband because he was a horrible fixer. No doubt she was bitter toward the other wife because the other wife was constantly rebuking her and making fun of her and picking at her. And bitterness was that was the picture of what was inside of her heart. Her soul was bitter. And she finds her hope. She prays to the Lord. It says she wept sore. In verse 11, and she vowed a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if thou will indeed look on thine affliction of thine handmaiden and remember me, and not forget thine handmaiden, but will give unto thine handmaiden a child, then I will give him unto the Lord all the days of his life, and there shall no razor come upon his head. And it came to pass, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli marked her mouth, or he was watching her mouth move. Now Hannah, she spoke in her heart, only her lips moved. I think this is important here. Where was her bitterness at? In her heart. The only outward expression of this was Eli walks in, or he sees this woman, and all he sees is her bawling her eyes out, and he sees her lips moving, but she is having a genuine one-on-one conversation with God. She's like, God, I have nowhere else to run to. I have nowhere else to go. I have no other option in this life. And God, she calls him the Lord of hosts. In fact, this is the first time in the Bible that this phrase is used. She's acknowledging you're in control of everything. It all belongs to you. She's like, you're it. She says, if you'll give me a son, she's like, I won't let a razor touch his head, and I will give him back to you. I just want to have a kid. He belongs to you. I'll literally donate my child to the temple. He's yours. She makes this vow to God in her heart. Really what this is, it's complete and utter surrender. She has no other place to go, no other place to turn to. She falls on her face and she's like, God, I give up. I can't do this. I am relying on you. Will you bless me? And Eli, because he was there and watching her, verse 13, we find it says that now Hannah spake in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore, Eli thought that she had been drunken. Like, to make matters worse, you got all this crazy stuff going on in your life, and then the priest comes up to you, and he's like, woman, are you drunk? And she's like, no, I promise. I have not been drinking. Verse 14, and Eli said unto her, how long wilt thou be drunken? He's trying to fix her. It's just the problem that men have. He's like, this woman has a drinking problem. I'm going to address it. Don't beat us up too bad. We're just trying to help, all right? He's like, how long are you going to keep doing this to yourself? How long are you going to keep drinking? Because he thought that she was drunk. And he says, how long wilt thou be drunk? He's like, get over it. Stop it. He says, put away thy wine from thee. Verse 15, and Hannah answered and said, no, my Lord, I am a woman of a sorrowful spirit. I have drunken neither wine nor strong drink, but I have poured out my soul before the Lord. He says, count not thine handmaiden for a daughter of Belial. She's like, don't look at me like I've got all kinds of problems and I'm this heathen woman. She's like, please don't look at me like that. She's like, I am as genuinely and as earnestly as I can, bringing my petition before God. It's from the depths of my heart, from the depths of my soul. Verse 17. Then Eli answered and said unto her, go in peace, and the God of Israel grant thee thy petition that thou hast asked of him. And she said, let thine handmaiden find grace in thy sight. So the woman went her way and did eat, and her countenance was no more sad. Did she have a kid that day? Oh, don't work like that. She didn't have a kid that day, but from that day forward, her countenance had completely changed. It's not because God had brought her what she was praying for. It's because she's like, I give up. I surrender. God, this is no longer my problem. It's no longer my issue. I've put it in your hands. It belongs to you. And so I'm trusting that you're going to take care of this. And her heart changes on a fundamental level. How often do we look for our peace, our hope, our contentment in what we want other people to give us? That's where Hannah was at. The other wife, logically, Hannah would have wanted her to at least be respectful and dignified to her and not make fun of her. But if she was looking for peace and hope and safety in Peninnah, it was wasted. She couldn't possibly fill Hannah's needs. Her husband, who loved her, supposed to be the one there protecting her, caring for her, being the spiritual leader in that family. He tried, but even though he showered her with the best of gifts, it wasn't enough to give her peace. It wasn't enough to give her hope. It wasn't enough to get her out of that place of bitterness that she was in. Even Eli himself wasn't able to even truly comprehend and understand what her need really was. You know where the bitterness comes from in all of that? Focusing on other people to one day be able to meet your needs. This isn't just to the ladies in the room. This is to the men in the room as well. But it just happens to be Mother's Day. I asked Sarah if I could share this or not, and she said yes, because she always says yes. In fact, sometimes on Sunday mornings, she's like, do you know what you're going to say? And I'm like, well, I think so. It hadn't quite clicked together yet in my mind. And she's like, well, when all else fails, just talk about me. So here we go. Our first year of marriage was horrible. Yeah, it was. I mean, I loved her, and she loved me, but we really didn't get along all that well. Like, on the simple things in life, yeah, maybe we got along, but like some of the core marriage issues, we did not get along with very well. We had two completely different perspectives on life, but in reality, our perspectives were exactly the same. I was looking at marriage as, what can I get out of this marriage relationship? And she's over here on the other side with, what can I get out of this marriage relationship? Let me tell you what that translates to. That translates to her saying, I'm expecting my husband to meet my needs and to make me happy. And over here on this side, I'm saying, well, we're married now, and I'm expecting my wife to meet my needs and to make me happy. But there's a problem when you start focusing on anyone else to meet your needs and to give you contentment and peace. It don't work. In my mind, I'm like, well, I gave you this, and I took you on this trip, and we had the wedding that you wanted to have, and I do this, that, and the other, and you should be happy with me. That sound like some other idiot in the Bible that we just read about? I was reading this article this past week, and it was about Mother's Day and how Mother's Day is basically how men need to step up and finally take their role in the family and just not waste Mother's Day. Every day of the year should be Mother's Day, and we shouldn't even have Mother's Day because every day should be Mother's Day. I have news for that woman. If you want to look back through the historical record of husbands in the Bible, I'm sorry, there ain't a whole lot of hope out there for you. I mean, just look at the patriarchs. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Abraham twice tells the enemies of God, she's my sister, because he wanted to protect himself. Right? You go up to Pharaoh and you're like, oh, well, I'm scared of Pharaoh. Honey, I'm just going to tell him that you're my sister and you just need to protect me. Like, yeah, good husband, right? From day one. And then he repeats. Isaac does the same thing. And Isaac chooses favorites. Isaac and Rebekah pick favorites, and they're like butting heads to the point where it just wasn't good. Jacob. Yeah, Jacob was a real humdinger. We're not even going to get into him, but Jacob had a whole host of problems. David, a man after God's own heart, is probably one of the worst examples of being a father in the whole book of the Bible. Maybe not the worst, but the worst example of a godly man being a father. He misses it. So ladies, I'm sorry. Your husbands are jerks. They don't think. They try to fix things that they have no business trying to fix, and they make situations worse. I'm sorry. The historical record proves it is not going to change. It's not going to change. You might get lucky and get one that's willing to try, but if your hope and peace is in him, he's going to leave you hanging. And husbands, your wives are perfect. Leave them alone, all right? Leave them alone. They're good. We're not even going to go there. But on the opposite side of mine and Sarah's marriage, Sarah had all of these expectations for me as well. Why do you push me in this area? Why do you expect this of me in this area? Why are you not happy with what I've done in this area? And it creates bitterness on both sides. And finally, we came to the point where we realized our marriage stinks and we've got to fix it because we're both selfish people. And so once we realized that and we both surrendered this mess to God, the bitterness, the animosity toward things not going one another's way, it disappeared. That doesn't mean it doesn't pop up from time to time, but our marriage is fundamentally different. I think back to when she had Mark. For those of you who don't know, Mark was our first child, and now he's like 7-ish, something like that. His birthday's in July, right? So, after we had Mark, I made some very dumb decisions. All right? She has Mark in July. I've never even held a baby before. I've never actually picked up a baby and held it. And there in the hospital, the nurse goes, "Here you go, Dad." They didn't even hand him to Sarah. It's like, Mom's got some issues. Here you go. And I'm like, ah! What do I do with it? It looks just like me. I'm freaking out. I thought it would look like Mom. It's like a little midget me. You know, it was like the weirdest feeling ever. And that was really cool. It was an amazing moment in my life. But Sarah had a whole host of problems after she had Mark. A whole bunch of physical issues that would span the course of several months. And then on top of that, she had postpartum depression on top of it. And so she would come to church and really just put on this face like I've got everything together and things are great. But really on the inside, she was falling apart. And me being the fix-it type of mentality, like I jump in, babe, I can fix this. You just need to do this, and you need to surrender this to God, and you need to do that. And I was horrible with, I was in no place to give her advice on how to take care of the kid, right? So you know what I did? Along about September, deer season comes along. Opening day of deer season, I blame this on Evan Milburn, by the way. Opening day of deer season, I see the biggest buck I've ever seen in my life, and this thing called buck fever sets in, and I spend September, October, November, and December trying my best to kill this deer because it was easier for me to put my focus there than it was for me to put my focus into my marriage, because every time I try to fix things at home to help my wife with this struggle that she's having, it seems like things get worse. Along about the end of December, I finally got the deer, right? Yeah, it's a monster 12-pointer. He's hanging in our bedroom right now as a reminder of my foolish days, right? But it wasn't long after this when she's completely just fallen apart, and I looked at her and I said, something is wrong with you, and you need to find out what it is. I can't help you. I'm here for you. I love you. I am sorry that I have avoided this relationship because things were so crazy in the past. I am here for you. That's what moms do, right? Isn't that what moms do? They pick up their kids and they just hug them. I'm here for you. I love you. I'll support you through this, but there is something going on and you and God have to figure it out. I'm here. And it was at that time when finally I said, I'm here. You're going to have to do this yourself, but I'll walk alongside of you. Something clicked in her mind. I can't explain it. It just changed. But it was because I was willing to just say, I'm here. I'm not going to try to fix this anymore. I can't fix it. But whatever it is you're walking through, I'm going to walk right alongside you through the thick and thin. I'm an idiot. I'm sorry. And things began to change. Mothers paint a beautiful example of that. It's what it comes innately to you. I'll pick up my kids, I'll love on them, and I'm just going to walk with them. Isn't that what Jesus does for us? I mean, I think right off about Matthew chapter 11. You turn there with me if you would. Matthew chapter 11, we're going to start in verse 27. Matthew chapter 11, verse 27. All things are delivered unto me of my Father, and no man knoweth the Son but the Father. Neither knoweth any man the Father save the Son, and he to whosoever the Son will reveal him. Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you shall find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Jesus makes it very clear here. He says, if you want to find rest, if you want to find hope for your souls, he says there is only one way to do it. He says it's through me. And he says, my yoke is easy and my burden is light. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. It means that Jesus has already done the work for you. He already carried the load as he went to Calvary. And he says, yoke up to me. How many of you have seen like the Amish guys out there with their oxen and they got them all like yoked together? You've seen that before? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, Jesus says, you need to get yoked up to me. He's like, I'll pull the weight. You walk alongside me. And when it gets to where you can't pull anymore, he's like, you're not going to fall back behind. You're still right there beside me, but I'm not going to let you go. We're stuck together. I'll pull the load when you can't. He says, come unto me, all you who are labor and are heavy laden. And he says, I will give you rest. The only place that you can find rest for your souls is in the person of Jesus Christ. From the context of marriage, your marriages should reflect that. Your marriage should reflect that. Wives, when your husband gets to the place where it's just like he can't go anymore, he's stuck, don't go off and leave him, because that's not what Jesus did for you. He's like, I'm right here. You're stuck with me, and I'll carry you when you're weak. Husbands, the same thing. When your wife is struggling and she can't go, don't do like the guy that we just read about. Well, honey, what about this? Honey, what about that? Don't you love me more than 10 sons? Didn't I give you everything that you could have ever wanted? I gave you a nice house. I gave you a new car. I gave you, the best restaurants, the best dates. You got money sitting in the bank. You could go down the whole list. But none of that brings any type of help or peace or consolation for our brokenness. We live in a country, or in a world really, that is attacking the marriage relationship. Marriage is a picture of Jesus Christ and His church. Your marriage is the only picture that you have in this life to show a lost and dying world of what your relationship with Jesus Christ looks like. You are the bride of Christ. Your marriage reflects your relationship with Christ, and Jesus Christ never walked off and left you in the dust. He stays by your side. I'll walk with you. When you can't go, I'll carry you. And when I get stuck, you carry me. And if we both get stuck, we're stuck together and we're yoked up with Jesus, and we're just going to keep going with Him. You see, so many people get so focused on filling their cup and feeling like they are fulfilled and full and have peace and have hope. But what we don't realize is that our cup has a fundamental problem, and that's the fact that it has a hole in the bottom of it. You have a cup that has a hole in the bottom of it. I can pour into my wife and pour into my wife and pour into my wife. But at the end of the day, she is always going to feel empty if her hope is dependent upon what I have to offer. It's going to leak out. If my hope and my peace is based on what my wife can do for me and how she can make me feel and how she can carry me. There's a problem with that too, because my cup has a hole in the bottom of it. And she can pour and pour and pour, and I will never be full. Because it runs out as fast as she can pour it in. I'm guilty of that. My wife is one of the busiest people that I know on this planet, and I ask and demand way too much from her. I do. Sarah, can you do this? Sarah, can you do that? While she's trying to juggle your guys' relationships and taking care of mops and raising our kids and her family and my and her relationship in the first place, and the list could go on and on and on. Paying the bills online, writing this check. I come to church and I'm like, babe, well, I haven't gotten our tithes together yet. Can I get you to write a check for me this morning? As we're walking out the door, and she's trying to get the pastor out the door and the kids out the door with their socks and shoes on. If you see our kids with mismatched socks, or their hair not fixed, don't blame it on my wife. It's my fault because I asked too much of her. And then after church is over, she's like, how did this morning go? And I'm like, man, I really botched that one. And she's over here like, I can't take it anymore. Stop it. I can't keep pouring into you. You need to take this up with God. That's what she tells me all the time. It's like, I love you. I'll pour into you, but you need to take this up with God. Go and read John chapter 4. The woman at the well. What does Jesus promise that woman at the well? He promises her living water, which springs up to everlasting life. Water that boils up and bubbles up and it just overruns. The fact that you have a hole in your cup is irrelevant when it comes to a holy God, because He has a limitless supply of water to fill your cup with. And as fast as it leaks out, He's able to pour it back in. That passage in John chapter 4, if you remember the story of the woman at the well, and she was a woman, we call her a woman of ill repute or whatever. She's had 5 husbands. The man that she's living with now is not her husband. But when she goes back to the city, who does she bring back with her? You remember? When she goes back to Samaria, she brings back how many of the men? All the men of Samaria come back with this woman. And she's like, you got to come and see this man who's told me everything that I have ever done. But when she left that well that day, guess what she left there? She left that pot. She left that bucket. That bucket that she was scooping up physical water with, she left it at the well that day. And she ran to tell others about this water that she had discovered that never runs out. It'll never leave you thirsty. It'll never leave you dry. My encouragement to you today, mothers, when your children leave you high and dry and your Mother's Day is not what it should be, just remember, your hope, it doesn't come from a group of kids that you had. If it does, you're going to be empty at the end of today. Your hope comes from Jesus Christ, the one who died for you, the one who plowed that road all the way to Calvary, the one who you are yoked up to now. And He says, listen, I'm not going to let you fall away. I'm going to keep you right here beside of me. And when you can't plow no more, He's like, I'm here. I'll carry you. That's who you need to depend on for your hope. That's who you need to depend on for your peace. Husbands, it's no different for you. When you're like, oh, well, it's Mother's Day, and, I'm going to lift up my wife because she was a good mother to my children, but I got some problems with her. She don't always fill up my cup. She don't always leave me fulfilled. She doesn't always leave me feeling like I'm full of hope and peace. Stop it. Stop depending on your wife to meet your spiritual needs, because that's what it amounts to. If you expect anything above and beyond, then you're expecting your wife to do what only God can do for you. Take it up with God. Take the pressure off of mom. When you have a husband and a wife who are both willing to do that, you have a marriage that is a rational picture of your relationship with Jesus Christ. You have what God desires. You have what His purpose is for marriage. There's a lot of us in this room, our marriages, maybe they don't look so good. Maybe they don't even exist anymore. That's life. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying you made the right decision. I'm not applauding you for that. I don't know the circumstances. I don't know the situations. But at the end of the day, I'll tell you exactly the same thing that I would tell to the married couple. Your hope cannot be dependent upon any other person in this life, because they will let you down. They'll leave you high and dry. The best person on this planet is not able to meet your spiritual needs. So I would ask you to do the same thing that Hannah did. The same way that she was able to find her peace with God. Yeah, God met her prayer request and gives her a son. It happened. But that wasn't what her peace and hope was dependent on. It came before the son. What is it? What is it? It is creating those holes in your cup. Give it to God. God, I surrender it. And not just with lip service, but from the heart, from the core of who you are. God, I recognize that nobody else on this planet can meet my needs but you. And I'm willing to give them to you. He'll never leave you high and dry. He'll never leave you thirsty. He'll never leave you wanting. He's not promised you the best that this world has to offer. But most of you have already found out that what this world has to offer you, all it does is leave you broken and wanting more. Where are you at? Where's your heart? Where's your desire? Is your desire for other people to meet your needs and make you feel fulfilled? If it is, messed up. If your desire is anywhere but pursuing the heart of God and His desire for your life, for your family, for your friends, for the people that you meet out on the streets, if you lose sight of that, you've lost sight of who you are in Christ. It's almost as if you're trying to unbuckle yourself from that yoke that you were yoked up to. How many of you have seen the picture? It's called Footprints in the Sand. You've seen that? It's like when you couldn't walk anymore, I carried you. That's what God does for you. When you can't pull anymore, He's like, I got this. I'll carry you till you can walk again. Surrender to Him, because it's the only place to find hope, peace, and contentment in this life. When you get to that place, the world can completely fall apart. And in here, don't change. What if your world fell apart today? Would you fall apart with it? You know how you tell? Look at the way you've handled circumstances and situations in the past and multiply it. Because bitterness gets worse and worse and worse and worse. Until you get to that place where you say, God, I give up. It belongs to you. There's no contentment to be had. So don't depend on Mother's Day to make you happy, because Mother's Day will mess up your day if you remember the other 364 days in the year. And Father's Day, fathers, most of us don't even deserve it. We should just wipe that one off the calendar. All right? So, all right, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Father, thank you for loving us. Father, we thank you for the fact that your Son paved the way to Calvary. And he has yoked himself up with us who are believers. He's walking alongside of us, carrying us when we fall, lifting us up when we can't lift ourselves. Father, I pray that our hope and our peace and our contentment would all be dependent upon that relationship. And Father, if there's one here today who does not know that relationship and with you, and they live day in and day out striving to fill their cup up with what other people have to offer them, Father, I pray that you would just touch their heart this morning, that maybe they would come to the realization that there is no peace and contentment to be had in this life without first surrendering themselves to you and your finished work on the cross at Calvary. Father, I pray that maybe today would be the day that they cry out and surrender to you and say, God, I give up. I give my mess and my bitterness to you. Father, we love you. We pray that the marriages represented in this room would properly, as best as humanly possible, represent your relationship with us in your Son. Father, we pray that we would be a light, a beacon in this lost and dying world. And we ask this in Jesus' precious and holy name. Amen. God bless you. You are dismissed.